Welcome in as we go one-on-one with the great Chip Towers, a titan of the newspaper business and now all things digital media. I'm Jeff Dantzler. Chip, we've been friends a long time. You've always been one of my favorite guys and without a doubt one of the most talented and just well-versed and well-known writers there is. My friend, I appreciate you taking a few minutes to be with us here this morning.
I'm glad to be here, Jeff. I'm glad anytime I have an excuse to take a shower, wash my hair, shave, brush my hair. I'm not sure I've done that in the last few days, so this was a great excuse to clean up a little bit, make myself presentable.
Well, we are going through just unprecedented times, and one of the things that's hit me and everyone I've interviewed and talked with, I've thrown this at them. So you're going to get this out of the gate. Anytime bad things happen, there are positives that come out of it. Now, I know for me, I've been as guilty as anybody in just taking things for granted. And I think when we get back, whether it's, as I've always said, me calling a 20-inning baseball game, or for athletes and coaches getting out for 6 a.m. workouts, or for you covering two-a-days, I think we're going to savor every single second of what we do.
Yeah, we are. One of the real revelations for me during this time is realizing just how much my life is attached to the Georgia schedule, as yours is as well. I'm traveling because of that. I'm going places because of that. For the entire month of March and April, I would have been at Georgia football practices, at basketball games. I was in Nashville when the pandemic, really took root, I guess you would say. And, I work from home all the time. Welcome to the Bogart Bureau. This is my office in Bogart, Georgia. So, I do the majority of my work here anyway, but I have to go out and cover games. And it's just so different when you don't have that to do. Now, I've had plenty to write about. At the AJC, we're doing a lot of different series, a lot of retrospectives. And, of course, there's daily, weekly updates from Greg McGarity and all of the powers that be in the world of the NCAA and of sports, across the nation. But it's not the same, it's not the same as covering a game, whether it be 20 innings or a 9-inning, 2-hour game, which I know is your dream and rarely happens. But this morning, for instance, I got a chance to watch the 1980 the replay of the 1980 Georgia-Florida game, and so many of those details I'd forgotten because everybody remembers Run Lindsay, but they don't remember all that stuff that happened before. And really right after, there was still some work to be done. That was fun to do. So there's been a lot of things bubble up kind of out of the crud that this thing is, and I've enjoyed that as well.
No, it has been, and I think we all have to take advantage of the opportunities. I know spending more time with family, and I had one of our little neighbors who's 4 years old asked me if I've enjoyed being home because of the COVID, and I said, well, I've certainly missed being with the baseball team, but it tried to make the most of enjoying spending time with Emily and some friends. And it is interesting, I think, for kids, your son Bryson's probably one of those. 10 years from now, he's going to look back on this probably a lot more favorably than all of us adults.
Yeah, this has been an unprecedented time, and you're right about Bryson. He's a 12-year-old, so he's getting homeschooled, and that has been really interesting on multiple levels. And he's like a lot of kids his age. He's into video games and those kind of things. So he's not totally thrown off by this thing. He's still able to converse and interact with his friends on these video games on a daily basis. And, he doesn't seem to sweat it too much doing things on these digital platforms. It's the old farts like you and me, Jeff, who've had to adjust to kind of the new world. But yeah, it has been good to be at home. My wife actually is an assistant principal and works in Gwinnett County and just returned to work this week. Thanks to Governor Kemp's lifting the order. And so she's going back to school just to get them wrapped up. Her school in particular in Gwinnett County was in the middle of spring break when everything hit. So the kids are having to come back and they're having to check them out and make sure they get all their stuff that was in the school and return their computers and those kind of things. So there's just all kinds of things that you would never think of in the old normal that you're having to deal with in the new normal.
Yeah, no, your wife's an educator. My wife's a teacher, and I mean, what they're doing, hopefully they'll all be getting big raises here pretty soon. One of Emily's friends sent her a note 2 days into this and said, I've got 3 kids. 2 of them have been kicked out of school, and one of them's been sent to the principal's office. They're my 3 kids. They're being homeschooled.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of stuff on social media. It's hilarious. It's like, that's it. I'm done. You graduate. It's a difficult thing, and especially we have some women here in our neighborhood who teach and have 3 or 4 kids of their own. So they're having to teach classes and homeschool their own kids. So it's a very challenging time. And, I know we'll get around to the sports aspect of it, Jeff. It's really challenging, for our leaders, for our country's leaders and the leaders in athletics. I just can't impress. And every time people talk about it, like, these are hard decisions these people are having to make, difficult decisions where there's really no good answer. And, I would certainly encourage everybody out there to pray for our leaders, whether they be local or national, because these are really difficult times for them.
Well, they certainly are, and the information is coming in so hot. And as we all live off of our cell phones and everything, we want everything instantaneously. I'm certainly not virtuous. The old saying, patience is a virtue. But now some good old-fashioned patience is I think the best thing we can have. And when all this started hitting, I mean, March 12th, the day the dominoes started to tumble, and I think we all kind of could see it. And I predicted, I said, April's going to suck. It's going to be a horrible month. I think May's going to be the buffer where we start getting some good news. And then hopefully June's when we start getting back up on our feet again. And I'll tell you, just having some optimism there, this last week and a half, it's been great to get some promising and uplifting news.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think May's an important month, and I think June's an even more important month. I think June is when people have to get back to work, right? I mean, in terms for all of this to work, and certainly work on time. Now, as you know from talking to Greg McGarity and reading the news and everything, they are contemplating every scenario known to man. I mean, that you could possibly have. Starting late, starting on time. With fans, without fans, with limited fans, all of those things are being contemplated and worked out every day. But I think at the end of it, by June, when a lot of people are expected to return to work, a lot of the stay-at-home mandates are supposed to be lifted in June. That's predicated upon the continued downturn of the disease. Then you can start talking about getting people back on campus. But at the end of the day, and this, it's going to come down to, in terms of college athletics, what they're able to do as a university. And once you determine what you're able to do as a university, you'll be able to determine what you're able to do in athletics, because at the end of the day, these guys are student athletes, and they'll have to be handled as such in this scenario.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing, too. We've got from kindergarten to college, we got to get school going back again, because that really is, and Chip, on the calendar we work on, basically football through the end of baseball, tennis, golf, track, whatever, basically end of August through the 1st of June, like so many people in the United States. That academic calendar, that's the engine that cranks everything up in August.
Yeah, it does. It's just, my mind is wondering as you're saying that, I'm thinking, where do you think the Georgia baseball team would be right now? Here we are in May, it's crunch time. They were sitting there at number 2 when the pandemic shut everything down. I know how excited you had to be about that. And so right now we would be really, we'd be getting ready to go into the spring meetings down in Destin. Baseball is starting to head toward the to the conference tournaments. We're well out of football at this point, out of spring football. G-Day would have been in our rearview mirror, and we'd have been looking forward to SEC Media Days in Atlanta in the coming months. That is the real, sort of hurdle that I see. Does that event happen in Atlanta in July as scheduled? That will be a very telling thing. And I know that Commissioner Sankey is still hopeful that happens. So we'll see.
Chip, looking ahead to football season, Georgia's defense should be outstanding. The punt game should be outstanding. There are a lot of really good pieces on that offense, but having to replace DeAndre Swift, Jake Fromm, Andrew Thomas in particular, three of the great players the school's ever had, Rodrigo Blankenship at kicker. Jamie Newman, I think, is going to do a really good job at quarterback. And my biggest two concerns for Georgia coming in are left tackle and place kicker. And obviously we'll see how the kicker thing plays out. And that's where, when you talk about missing spring practice, Matt Luke, who is just a grand slam hire. I love Coach Luke, and I think we could see his immediate impact in the Sugar Bowl. I know he hated not having that spring to work with Owen Condon and Xavier Truss and Warren McClendon just to see who that left tackle was going to be.
Yeah, you're right, and you touched on it. Look, I don't want to get too far ahead of the game, but there's a lot of, as there should be in this era of Kirby Smart football, there is a lot of optimism regarding the 2020 team, but there's also a lot to be concerned about, and you touched on it right there. I mean, you talk about Rodrigo Blankenship, and obviously you're making a change at quarterback and at your featured tailback position, but I would just boil it down to this. I mean, I would have points production. And that was an issue last year anyway. Certainly toward the end of the year, Georgia wasn't scoring at the rate that we're used to seeing them score here in the modern era of football. And that's going to be an issue. I mean, you're replacing 4 offensive linemen. Starters basically is what it is. Sorry about that. Baxley's got
Albus will get the bark off with him here in just a second. It's all good.
Yeah, so these are the things we get used to nowadays. But anyway, that is a huge concern. Not only are you replacing quarterback and 4 offensive linemen and your featured tailback with a couple of pretty good receivers as well. I mean, George Pickens is great. You got to have more parts outside than that. And the flip side of this is I'm so excited about Georgia's defense. I mean, I think this is a generational defense, and that's what's going to dictate the success that Georgia has in the 2020 football season whenever it gets around to it. Jeff, you know this. In baseball, you got to be strong up the middle. And in football, you got to be strong up the middle too. And I think Georgia's just really strong up the middle. When you talk about guys like Jordan Davis on the line of scrimmage, certainly Monty Rice, I think, has a chance to be an All-American. Not to mention the young kid, Nagobe Dean, who's going to spend a lot of time next to him. And Richard LeCount there in the middle of the field. Love that defensive backfield. Love the secondary. I mean, Georgia's going to be very, very tough to score upon. But at the end of the day, you got to put points on your board yourself. And I love the fact that you got Jamie Newman here. It's too bad he didn't get a spring to kind of work and get together with Todd Monken and figure things out. But you know what I like about him best? Jeff, that dude is 6'4", 235 pounds and mobile. And that's going to be really important. And there's many times throughout football history that the broken play has been the best thing that ever happened. I think Georgia's got great candidates on the offensive line, but there's no way that you can expect these guys to be as good as they were last year with Andrew Thomas on one side and Isaiah Wilson. Just ask the NFL draft about that. If you're going to have, you tell me right now you're going to have first rounders at the left tackle and right tackle, I may feel differently about it, but I don't think you can guarantee that. So I think Jamie Newman and his ability to ad lib and avoid pressure and kind of make things happen is going to be huge for this team whenever we can get him on the field.
No, I agree with you. Talking about that offense, Charlie Werner leaves huge shoes to fill. Such an outstanding player, did so many things. And that's the thing with the offense. That last year, Georgia had this incredible run through November, but I think we had gotten spoiled by all the blowouts that Georgia had gotten the 2 previous years. And I've said before, I think last year was the most stressful great season in the history of Georgia football. I think back to Chip when you were in school and starting with the Athens paper and how close we were in 85, 86, 87, 88, just right there to winning a couple more SEC titles. Think, God, just maybe next year, what I would have given as a teenager then to have had a year where we win the Sugar Bowl, beat Florida, Auburn Tech, Tennessee, Texas A&M, and Notre Dame. There was so much pressure last year, kind of that national championship or bust, because Georgia had been so close. It was really as great a season as it was. You could feel the pressure and the stress through it. It was a bizarre season last year. And again, we had all this talent on offense, but we weren't scoring a ton. We were playing a tough schedule. We're winning most of those games. There were just really a lot of things that were kind of butting heads there last season.
Yeah, football is such the ultimate team sport, and I think Georgia was really, really special in 2017. I mean, we all know that, but from a team chemistry standpoint, and whatever it was, for whatever reason, I think that was missing a little bit on this team last year. But what you can't lose in the middle of that is how good this team was. I mean, you've been around a long time. I've been around a long time. I try to remind people all the time, 11-win seasons aren't to be taken for granted, man. They're hard. Everybody in this league is trying to, and there are great players everywhere. And, there's no longer, there used to be a day when, Vanderbilt and Mississippi State and some others were at a significant disadvantage to the rest of the league because of resources. That's not really the case anymore. I mean, everybody can build a gleaming indoor building, and everybody can have all the training and training table resources that you need because of all the money that's pouring into the league. So, what Kirby Smart is doing in this era is incredible, particularly from a recruiting standpoint. He's beaten a lot of really good programs, the Alabamas, the Florida, the Tennessees of the world, the majority of the time for the players that they want. And the ability to do that is incredible. Last year, I think you saw Jake Fromm and a lot of those other players on an imperfect team kind of feel that pressure a little bit. And, you touched on it. It was weird. It was a bizarre season. I mean, Kentucky is just pouring down rain. It was just everything was inconvenient. Everything was hard. Everything was well earned. I mean, I would say that as well. I mean, I think Georgia got everything they had, and that weird LSU game, injuries that you had at wide receiver, all of that came to play. That was a great team that Georgia had last year against a very, very tough schedule. And this year, is I think going to be a real telltale sign as to whether they can kind of keep this thing rolling for a while.
Chip, just one, and this is, I guess this is just me pointing out things that have been tough and heartbreaking, those three Alabama games this past decade. But when I look at the 21st century here and kind of the parallels between Georgia and LSU, there are two things that stand out to me, and this definitely goes for Clemson, Alabama, and a little bit of Auburn too. Number one, and I don't know the answer to this, Georgia, and luckily guys like Richard LeCount and Monty Rice decided to come back, but we've been losing the year before to lose Holyfield and Nauta and Ridley. We've been losing too many guys who are mid to late round picks, or guys who don't even get drafted, like Trenton Thompson. And I look at Alabama, they're getting 2 or 3 first-round picks back. Joe Burrow could have gone. He decided to come back. And the other big thing is LSU has played 4 national championship games in New Orleans. They've won 3 of them. And I know it's Alabama. We got to do a better job, and I don't know what the answer is, of getting guys to come back for their senior years, because Kirby's 2 biggest recruits are Nick Chubb and Sony Michel. And we've got to start winning these big games in Atlanta. I know that sounds simplistic. That's kind of the answer to everything. And, I don't know how to do it except maybe you get that next Chubb and Michelle that decide to come back, and then we finally get over the hump over there.
Yeah, well, the key is you got to keep getting opportunities, right, Jeff? That's why I think this year is so big. I mean, you see a lot of chest beating going on down in Gainesville, Florida, and Knoxville, Tennessee, right now. And those programs aren't going to stay down forever. And I won't say that Kirby has benefited necessarily from where those programs were, but because his teams have taken care of business against some pretty good teams that those programs fielded. But that's why I think it's really important this year that you kind of keep your foot on the neck and look, it's about getting those opportunities. I mean, Georgia was so close. You could not be any closer between 2017 and losing to Alabama in the big game, between 2018 and losing in the SEC championship game. And then last year's, LSU, I'm not sure anybody, could have upset that apple cart. That was just rolling downhill and was going to be difficult with anybody to stop. But then again, you go back and you look at that game, I mean, if you hang on to the football on that first drive, who knows how that game could have been different. That, some real critical injuries between Lawrence Cager during the season and certainly Dominique Blaylock during that game. Jake Fromm even getting banged up pretty good in the game. That can't be lost. But, yeah, you got to keep getting the opportunities, and you have to cash in eventually. The narrative out there against Georgia is it's been since 1980. And until you change that, that's always going to be the knock against you. And I think LSU is a great example. LSU and Georgia are such parallel programs. I mean, I think it's incredible how parallel those two programs are. And I think LSU stands as proof that it can be done. For whatever reason, maybe they need Dan McGill to read the pregame invocation like he did at the Jacksonville Bulldog Club in 1980 and invoke some providential powers here, because Georgia has definitely been snake bitten, and I don't know why.
No, I don't, trust me. I'd go back through them and think my biggest dreams are for Georgia to win another national title or 2 or 3, and to get that 9-game winning streak over Tech, to get the longest streak in the history of the series. And you think those 3 Alabama games this past decade and the only 3 losses that Georgia had to Tech, up 28-12 in 08, the squib kick in 14, up 27-14 with the ball in 16, and obviously had double-digit leads in all 3 of those Bama games in the second half. You're talking about being that close to having these incredible dreams come true.
Yeah, and Jeff, I just know your history. I mean, you were coming up, in the 1980s, and I've been doing a lot of retrospectives for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and it is. It's such a joy to talk to people like Frank Ross, Herschel Walker, I talked to not too long ago, Buck Bellew. That you were just so close to being one of the most dominating runs in the history of Georgia football from 1980 to 1983. I mean, that was just an incredible time period. And I say that to say this, because I think we're in that same kind of window for Georgia. Everything's rolling. Kirby Smart's the right guy at the right time. You're recruiting. You're getting everything you need from a facility standpoint. The Georgia people, and I was talking to Lauren Smith the other day, and what a resource he is. And he was just talking about the power of the Georgia people. If you get everybody at Georgia pulling in the same direction, it is an incredible machine that you can get going here. It's just getting over that edge. Mark Richt talked about it years ago when he won the 2002 SEC championship. It's knocking the lid off of it, that lid is still remained a little bit of fixed. You've never been able to get that thing pop free. If they can ever do it, I think we're going to see your dreams come true, Jeff.
I think so too. We've definitely got the right guy, and it just makes a difference. And obviously, there have been guys like Nick Saban and Urban Meyer who've had great success. But when you look at Steve Spurrier, General Neyland, Bear Bryant, when it's home, when it's the alma mater, it's different. And this is where Kirby and Mary Beth have always wanted to be. They're going to be here for a long time. And we've been so close. The one thing in the early 80s, we won that national title in the first year of the run. So the pressure wasn't quite as great. But I feel like we've got a chance to be really, really good for a long time. And I agree. When we finally do win that national title, I think another 1 or 2 or 3 will follow that.
Yeah, I think it will too. And, I'm not sure if it's 2020. Georgia's going to open the season again whenever it gets here, in the top 10 again, probably the top 5, maybe the top 5. That's where they ended last season. And, again, we it's our jobs, Jeff, to break it down. And if they do do it this year. It'll be a surprise to me. I got to be honest. I mean, the schedule is what it is, and the offense is what it is. So it's going to take some really special guys coming through, obviously on the offensive line, obviously at quarterback. Can Zeus be, the featured guy back there? I mean, he certainly got the resume for it, and several of those other guys. Can you take advantage of George Pickens' talents? Is he able to make the resident improvements you need a freshman to a sophomore year to make without the benefit of spring practice? And who knows what we're going to get in the summer. But you got the one thing you got to have. You're going to have a good, you alluded to it at the break. I mean, at the outset, that defense and that punting game, kicking game. Now we'll see what the place kicking position looks like. But if you can come through in those areas, Georgia will have a chance to win every game it plays, no question.
I think so too, Chip. And just one last thing, I was saying about this with Kirby. The offensive line going into last year was hyped. They were good at pass blocking, not good at run blocking. I think big picture, and Kirby even said that they underperformed. Again, a good line. I'd love to have those guys back, but it was by no means a dominant line. I would think for him, for the defense this year, it's a pretty easy message. You remember what happened with the O-line last year. Don't let all this hype go to your head. Maybe somewhat similar to the message he gave the team before the Sugar Bowl. Remember what happened here last year?
Yeah, I think it'll be good that the offense will go into the season. They'll have a chip on their shoulder because everybody's counting them out. All those guys, and they're high pedigree guys. They're going to be stepping into starting positions like Jamari Sawyer, Ben Cleveland healthy finally. Trey Hill, I think, is an All-America candidate at center if he stays there. I mean, there's a lot of options, but, you touched on it, and I don't know whether I've heard you talk about this or not, but, I think Georgia might have had some schematic issues on the offensive line with Sam Pittman that just didn't take advantage of the talent that you had on the offensive line with a lot of that zone blocking scheme and stuff they used. I think you're going to see a little bit of a difference in Matt Luke. Now, look, there's no questioning that Sam the man, he can get the best offensive lineman anywhere to sign with you. His track record is impressive. But I'm really going to be interested. One of the big storylines for me is going to be, what does Matt Luke get out of this new offensive line, and how different is it? I mean, schematically, are they going to change some of the things they do? We haven't had a chance to visit with Todd Monken about that, or really Kirby Smart about Todd Monken and Matt Luke. What does that look like when it all comes together? That's going to be fascinating to see, and could be a real key to what happens in 2020.
I know this with Matt Luke. I got a thumbs up, great hire from both Hugh Nall and David Andrews the day it happened. That's all I needed to know. I think he's tremendous and is going to do an incredible job with this unit. We certainly saw glimpses of that in the Sugar Bowl.
Yeah, we did, and Todd Monken as well. I mean, I'm fascinated about that. And look, I don't think it's going to be radically different. Georgia's always going to take advantage of their tradition and legacy at running back. They're going to run the football. So I don't think Georgia's all of a sudden going to be spread all over the field. But I think you're going to see them take some shots and find some way to take some shots, and that's going to be exciting. Georgia people, they're always calling, why don't we throw deep? Why don't we throw deep? There's a reason why you don't throw deep, and we're going to see how much they're able to do that under Todd Monken with a new quarterback and a largely new wide receiver corps.
And the key to happiness in life, throwing when you want to, not when you have to.
Absolutely true. Spoken well.
Chip, my friend, it is always an honor. I really appreciate it, and hope we can do it again soon. And let's keep the good news rolling back here, and hopefully we kick off on time this fall, and also hopefully soccer and volleyball get everything going again in August too.
Yeah, I hope they do, and I'm glad to be here, Jeff. And listen, man, you are a treasure for the University of Georgia. They're lucky to have you, and your ability to kind of be a walking historian is a treasure to be able to access anytime. I appreciate you being accessible to me time to time and help me out.
Well, it's my honor, and anytime I get quoted by you or Mark Bradley, it's always a thrill to me. And you've been a great friend and mentor to me, Chip, and I always love reading your stuff. You are absolutely a Hall of Famer, my friend. I do appreciate it.
We'll see you around, buddy.
Thank you, Chip. That is the great Chip Towers. Thanks to our producer, Bob Miller. He's awesome. I'm Jeff Dantzler. We'll see you next week as we go one-on-one